Hi everyone. Hi Vijita ma'am. Hi Rutvik. Hi Shivam sir. Hi everyone.
Hello, sir. Good
Hi.
evening.
Hi everyone and all the
Hello, sir. Good
students who
evening.
have joined. Great. Thanks for joining. I hope all of you had a decent attempt today at CAT. Irrespective of your slot, whether it was slot 1, 2, or 3, you were able to do reasonably well and do justice to the paper that you had. So I hope it went okay for all of you. Today, what we're going to discuss in this particular session is sort of a comparison and analysis of slot 1 versus slot 2 versus slot 3. And we have mentors, senior mentors from IMS who have taken in different slots. So we have Rutvik sir who took it in slot 1. Uh, we also have Vijita ma'am who was there in slot 2. Shivam sir, you were also in slot 1, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I was there in slot 3. So we'll be sharing our perspective of how the whole thing went, and we'll be talking about the individual slots and the difficulty and so on. Okay. So let's start. First things first, there was no major surprise in terms of the number of questions. So total number of questions remained the same, 68. In each of the sections also there was no change. But the three major things that you can say is firstly paragraph jumbles. The para jumbles resurfaced in CAT 25. There was no change in LRDI. That's the only thing that happened in DLR, apart from maybe the minor fluctuations in difficulty. QA was definitely more difficult, right? So compared to CAT 24, more difficult QA. But of course, in slot 1, there were reports of QA being a little easier. So we'll of course ask Ritvik and Shibam how they felt about the whole paper. So let's first start with VARC. And when you look at VRC, you had four passages with four questions each in RC, and VA you had uh, for each of the question types you had two questions, right? So let's start with slot one. So Rutvik and Shivam, both of you appeared in slot one. So any particular thing that you want to share regarding the VRC of slot one, and then we can move on to Vijita ma'am.
So
Yes,
one,
I noticed one thing. Sorry, please go ahead.
yes, sir, you go first.
Okay. So I noticed that the questions were not well segregated this time. So you had a para summary at the beginning, then you had one set of RC, then there were a couple of other questions which were non-RC, and then again you had suddenly two RCs. Although the majorly non-RC questions were segregated towards the end, but they were not well segregated. That's what I understood from the paper.
Also, the options were slightly lengthier than they are supposed to
Yes,
be. So, if
absolutely.
you look at the summary questions, the summaries were actually 2 lines long, and you literally had to read through each word of the summary to find out what exactly is wrong in each of the options to try and eliminate the options. That was one. Also, the RC on the electronic music one had really difficult questions when it comes to answering them because they had CR part in it. We could easily spot double negations in those questions. Alienists wala RC was easy to read. It was light on the mind as well. You could go through the RC very smoothly, answer the questions as well. Income inequality RC was also doable. And I also found the complex system RCs to be slightly more challenging in terms of understanding what the RC had more than the questions. If you were able to get what the RC is trying to say, you'll be able to do it. We also discussed that one of the questions had a direct vocabulary based questions, but again, the vocab question was more of a contextual question, wherein if you're able to understand where it is exactly there in the entire passage, and if you're understanding the 2 3 lines that follow the word, you'll be able to answer that question as well. So RC level remained as you generally expect from CAT. So I would just rate this 5 to 7% more tougher than the previous year CATs that have attempted. Not more than that. So 5% higher than probably CAT 23 and CAT 24.
Okay, and Vijita ma'am, how was slot two VRC?
So slot 2 VRC in comparison with CAT 24 slot 1 was definitely difficult. And I think considering all of the input that came in regarding slot 1, based on that, so your assessment or your entire understanding of the sectional ends up being based on that. So when you consider that this was reported as difficult or challenging, I found slot 2 was not really very difficult. Okay, it is comparable to a moderate SimCat VRC sectional that we've had, not a very difficult one. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, when you compare it with slot 1 CAT 24, it was definitely more difficult. But for a well-trained student, it was very possible. Now, selection was very important in these RCs because, and I want to believe that these RCs that were marked as that are marked as easy and medium are fairly doable ones, because there was that one RC which is very descriptive, information based, with fairly straightforward questions. And I want to believe that trend has continued. We've seen that trend in the last several years, and that's always there. So I always consider about 30% of that sectional to be on the easy side. So that was there. So even an average student, someone who's not very good with the VRC, could find some 8 to 10 questions to solve if he picked well. Okay. And that's where I guess our 85 percentile also is roughly around that, right? About 20 marks or so, which is absolutely fair. Now, the challenge would be if you pick the wrong RC, because particularly in slot 2, what I found was there were two difficult RCs. I mean, they're not very difficult, not the kind that we saw in, say, CAT 21. There was that extremely abstract RC with those isms, etc. It wasn't like that. The language could be understood. There was a lot of density there, but you can still understand the language. But you had to carefully read it. They were fairly argumentative, and the questions were also, as Rutvik sir mentioned, critical reasoning based. Now, what was interesting and what might have derailed students a bit, and why the overall feeling is that, oh, this was very difficult, is probably because the question phrasing, question stem phrasing was very different. Now you look for certain typical words. You are so accustomed to it because if you track the patterns of several years, you'll find that there are typical words in every question stem. So you have this feeling of familiarity. You feel very comfortable. Okay, this is something I know. Now the question stems were worded very differently, but ultimately they were all testing pretty much the same thing. For instance, that logical structure question, which we found a lot of last year as well as the year before, now that was missing. And students expected that. Even our test series, I think, largely focused on that. You would have one question in one RC, or in an entire sectional, you would have some 3 questions of logical structure. That wasn't there. Okay. But the easy part was there was that except question. A lot of questions ended with that except. So that is one familiarity. The difference was in the way in which certain questions were phrased, particularly in slot 1. I want to believe this was there in slot 1 and slot 3. I mean, you can't have 3, 4 questions of a certain question stem and have it missing in the other slots. This was where there were picks, statements picked from the RC. 4 such statements were picked from the RC, and the questions stem revolved around which of these supports a certain idea or which one does not support a certain idea. In fact, as I mentioned in the panel discussion too, there was this one question stem which was phrased as, which is the odd sentence amongst these options. Now, the students are not used to question stems like this. To expect a question stem asking you which is odd, which means you needed a good reading of the RC. You had to keep the main idea of the RC in the background and then identify which one is not in sync with the main argument of the author. So these things might have slightly derailed students. Okay, there was also this slightly debated question of one of the difficult RCs, that science and culture RC, which had, the machinery used in the passage or mentioned in the passage is least comparable to, all right. And there were a set of implements talked about. So there were different questions. And as you mentioned, slot 1 probably had a contextual vocabulary based question. Slot 3 also, I hear reports that there was at least one vocabulary based question. Slot 2 didn't have that, all right. But yes, if you chose the first 2 RCs, which were very visible. For me, it was the same order. In my sectional, it is the same order that the RCs appeared in. The first one was that tetrafish, which was very descriptive, options very short, so easily done. The biases of AI, fairly short RC, despite the general feeling that, RCs were really long. This was a fairly short one, just about short 4 paragraphs, and it's a known area too. Now, the challenge came if you started maybe with the third RC or the fourth RC. So I want to believe that across your selection would have made a big difference. 2 RCs could easily be done. I found the VA part very easy. Okay. Honestly speaking, I call it very easy because in the past we have seen challenging VA questions. So comparatively, that is in past papers, we've seen challenging VA questions. So comparatively, the odd sentences were easy. There was an absolute sitter of a parajumble. I mean, I'm speaking from the point of view of a fairly well-trained student, someone who's given multiple mocks and so understands trends. There was a sitter of a parajumble, okay, absolute sitter. So you couldn't miss that. The sentences were short and the connections were very visible. So that's one. The two odd sentence questions, as I said, had two clear pairs. So you connect those two pairs, you find that one sentence stands out. Yes, the summary questions, I agree, were little lengthy. Yes, you had those options being lengthy. The language was a little abstract, but one of the summary could be managed. The other one, yes, was a little on the abstract side. Both of the para completion questions, I found that the abstract one, which had difficult language, was very short. The other one was rather long, but you could identify it. It was visible. So if you picked well, 5 to 6 questions from VA could be done, right? So this notion of, it's been a complex VARC, very difficult, is not really true. Maybe students didn't find that sense of familiarity, okay? But if their reading is in place, if their, thought processes are all right, if they apply all the right techniques that they have been taught over the years, absolutely, you can get about 12. So you can maybe solve about 15, 16, that is on the higher side, even up to 18. You can even get a 12, 13 questions correct, even up to 14. So this is my take on it.
So the sense that I get, and again, slot 3 also had similar thing, right? Where there were some RCs which were obviously easy, the ill effects of dam, for example, and then tribal art was like the most difficult one that we found. Pretty much we can agree that in all the slots, there were RCs which were slightly dense to read compared to
Yes.
some of the earlier years, and the question stems were unfamiliar. So to
Yeah.
most of the students, because of which it became slightly more difficult compared to the last year. And correct me if I'm wrong. So slot 2, you mentioned there was no question on the meaning of the word.
None.
Okay, so in
No.
slot 1 there was one, it seems, and slot 3
Ah,
also there was a question on I think instantiate, as to how what can replace that particular word in the context of the passage. So that
In
was one
slot
thing
one,
that
sir,
was.
it was sui generis. There was this
Okay.
word called sui generis, and we had to actually figure out what that word would mean in the context of the paragraph. So if you
Okay.
read a line or two, right where the word actually pops in, you'll be able to understand what context it is used in, and then you'll be able to apply it as well. It
Yeah,
was
so
not
maybe some.
a very difficult question, but again, it was specific to a certain vocabulary part of
context.
VA.
Okay, so some students could have even read that particular part and answered that question, is what you.
Yes, sir, exactly.
Okay, all right. Let's move on to the next section. So we'll talk about the DLR section now. So DLR overall, the sense that we are getting is that there were some sets which were definitely doable. So in all the slots, there were one or two sets which were easily doable. But yes, there were of course the difficult ones as well. So again, we'll start with slot 1, and Rutvik and Shivam, if you want to start on slot 1 difficulty of the sets.
Sure. So the import export set that we mentioned easy was actually easy. I will not try to debate that. But the language of the options, import and export, we talked about it in the panel discussion as well.
Hmm.
The language made understanding the data slightly tricky. So when somebody is asking you what are the exports that UK makes to France, you had to actually try to reverse the data in order that it is actually given to you. So the understanding the language of the set was very important, especially the options. The options had tricky languages. Apart from that, DII felt was more on the lines of what are you comfortable with. So we mentioned that 5 people tapping yes and no and maybe was a certain difficult set, but I solved it as the second set of my entire data DILR. So it was a very classic example of Karoken, where you had to make a certain total using 1, 2, and 3. So if people have been practicing that, they'll be able to solve it. Again, the employee rating of 6 employees was something that I got stuck in the exam itself. So that took some time. So the two sets that I was able to solve entirely was the easiest set and the most difficult set according to the data. And I was stuck in the medium set. So again, the DI was accessible to the people who had practiced it. Whatever your strengths may be, you had certain sets which would actually fulfill those strengths, and you can go ahead and solve those sets. So CAT 24, if I compare it to CAT 24 slot 1, it was definitely on the tougher side. At least a 20% markup on the difficulty levels of CAT 24 slot 1, but not at the level of CAT 23 for sure. So CAT 23 was definitely more difficult. CAT 24 was definitely very easy. This was somewhere in the middle of the two.
Okay, Shivam sir, anything on slot 1?
Yes, so I think DILR is again back to where it used to be, right? People have again started talking in terms of 1.5 set, 2 sets, etc. Unlike the outlier last year where people were able to make 3.5 sets also. Second thing, yes, I totally agree with Ritvik sir, with the import-export set being the easiest one, and people should have done that. Okay, because finding the other doable set was definitely challenging. So this is something that everyone should have done. Agreed that the language was slightly tricky, but what you have to do is you have to sit with that, spend some time with it, and do it meticulously. You get all four right. All right. The second set, I also ended up selecting the last one, the 5% tapping yes and no, as my second set, and I could do almost 75% of it out of, I think there were five questions, isn't it?
Yes, sir. There were exactly five
So
questions, and
I
we
was
were able
able
to
to,
figure out two columns, as we had
yes.
talked about in the panel discussion as well.
Hmm,
Two
hmm, hmm.
columns were entirely available. The rest of the columns were not available, and then we had to make sets. So 3, 1, 1, 3, and 1, 2, 2, 1.
So we could get the entire row-wise total, the entire column-wise total, and we could fill two of the columns completely, but didn't have any clue about the other two or three columns, right? With there were also some partially filled data that we had in those columns, but we could not fill those three columns completely. And because of that, I could not answer all the questions, but two or three questions were easily gettable, even if somebody solves the table partially. The same thing happened with me in the third set also, where there was performance rating needs to be done of six employees A, B, C, and D, E, F. So there were, I think, two groups. One was novice group, and the second one was elite group.
Elite group.
Uh, huh. So over there, although I could not solve the set completely, but I was able to attempt two of the question with a fairly, decent understanding of what is happening around there. The second set on the list here, the train movement from station A to E. Unfortunately, I just skipped it after having looked at the set for around a minute or so. So I didn't get the opportunity to get into that set and capitalize anything on that. Again, circular layer set. I think there were a lot of iteration in two of the set. So the third one, where we were talking about the performance rating of six employees, there were four iterations that need to be done. That is quarter one, quarter two, quarter three, and quarter four data that you have to analyze. Same way for the next set. I think there were seven rounds involved. A,
Right.
B, C, D, and there again there were three rounds A, B, C. So my take on this is obviously students should be able to solve the first set entirely. Beyond that, if you are able to solve any of the four sets completely, you have done really well, right? If not, you have option
Complete
two,
sets
that
would
is out
give.
of the four sets, you might take two or three from wherever you can, and that is how you can complete your second set.
So there are two ways of actually going about this. You can get one set, the DI set, entirely right, and then you can pick one set that you want to do entirely
Exactly.
in the
Hmm.
remaining 20 minutes. Or what you can do is you can pick one or two questions from each set. So there were questions available in each set that the kids can do without
Yes.
solving the entirety of it. But you cannot do both of them. So now when you look at the number of attempts that a kid can make, a good kid should be able to make somewhere close to 10 to 12 attempts. That is 2.5 sets. अगर आप 3 सेट करके आ रहे हो then it is actually very good.
Okay. So a lot of students are asking when the response sheet will be out and will it contain the individual responses? Yes, so the response sheet should be out in about 7 to 10 days from now, and it will contain what you responded to a particular question and what the right answer is given by the authority. So it will contain both, post which of course we'll have clear understanding of what you are scoring, and then we'll be able to predict the percentile as well. So again, I think slot one, the sense that I'm getting is slot 2 and slot 3 also. DLR was similar. So it's not that there were a lot of fluctuations in terms of difficulty across the three slots. Of course, when we compare it against CAT 23 and CAT 24, as Rutvik said, right, it wasn't as difficult as CAT 23, but definitely easier than CAT 24, right? So that is where we'll be putting the whole difficulty overall. So even in slot 3, so when I did the live analysis, I said that there was a set which somebody could have solved in 5 minutes, and there were students who solved it in 5 minutes because it was easy. See, when we make these statements, you have to understand the kind of students that we are talking about, right? So there are, of course, students who have practiced all 40 SIMCATs, right? They have done all PassCat papers because that particular set was easy. Now, the thing is, you may not have spotted it earlier. So, for a lot of people, when they started and they saw that to be the first set, it was very easy for them to jump onto that. So, there were two sets which were definitely doable. Third set, you could have kind of squeezed in a little bit because there were some calculations involved. But otherwise, the pure LR sets, for example, there was a circular arrangement with 7 students and the 4 friends solving puzzles also, which was DI, but fairly straightforward DI, and the 6 friends calling each other, which is also DI, uh, definitely doable, right? So somebody could have done 2 sets today nicely, and you could have squeezed in a third one if you are somebody who is like consistently getting 99 plus percentile. I think it was possible to do the third one. The currency exchange was difficult because of the complexity involved, and of course the trade balance one also, which was fairly calculation intensive. Now let's move on to quant, and then we'll talk about the individual section wise, how what we think should be the score versus percentile table. I'll just start with the overall comment on quant from slot 3, and then we'll move on to slot 1 and 2. So slot 3, at least I found to be calculation intensive, and that was what a lot of people said, that you have to do a lot of rough work to sort of get to the answer, a lot of solving. Especially some numbers were such that you have to really write down things to get to the answer, or for a lot of questions you had to reach the calculator. So that was from slot 3. Now, compared to that, was slot 1 easier? Because that was the earlier report, right? So people
Uh,
who came out from slot 1 said it was easy. And
so,
a lot of
to
people
give you a
walked in
very
with that mindset that it is going to be easy for slot 2 and 3, and then they were surprised.
No, I actually don't think so, because I remember I've attempted somewhere close to 16 questions. I was only able to attempt 16 questions. These are very genuine attempts, out of which I've already checked, and it should be somewhere close to 14 correct. So out of the 16 attempts, I remember, sir, that I had to use calculator in at least 9 of them. So if I give you an example, there was a question on SICI where generally you use certain ratios or something to get the answers, but you had 7.5% as the rate of interest, and then you had to apply it actually 4 times on a principal of 9,600, and then subtract 9,600 from the answer to get the interest that you got. So it was actually calculative. Then there was this arithmetic questions which required you to actually sit on them and try and think about how do you go about this. One on cost optimization, and the one on time and distance, where the entire distance was broken up into 4 parts. Each part having like the distance was in AP. The time or the speed was also in AP. So those required you to actually sit up on the questions and spend some time with them. Algebra, on the other hand, was on the easier side. Geometry was on the easier side, because I remember 2 out of the 3 questions from slot 1. One was of a certain parallelogram wherein you had to find the fourth vertex, and then you had to figure out where exactly does one of the diagonals intersect the x-axis. Another geometry question, if I remember it correctly, was about a certain rhombus. I remember this because there is this question, same question, a slightly complex question in the chapter miscellaneous geometry, wherein we are able to find out d1 plus d2 and then d1 minus d2, and then we have to find a shorter diagonal according to the module. Here we just had to find the value of d1 minus d2, which was the absolute difference between the length of the two diagonals. I was able to get that done as well. There was this question on circles, which was slightly tricky, so I had to leave that particular question. But out of the 8 arithmetic questions, a good kid should be able to attempt somewhere close to 5 to 6 questions with ease. Algebra, the person should be able to attempt somewhere close to 3 questions out of the 4. Modern math, 2 out of 4 were doable. One on the sandwiches was actually easy. Geometry made 2 out of 3 were doable. And when we talk about numbers, one question was an absolute sitter that I remember. There was a certain 3-digit number, which the number exactly was 268, because you could not use a zero, you could not use any of the squares, and only one prime number can be used. And then you had to take the smallest number which satisfies these conditions and find the number of factors, which was very textbookish and should have been solved by the kids. So good kids should be able to attempt somewhere close to 8 to 10 attempts with decent accuracy, should help them clear the cutoffs. and attempts on the higher side can go up till 16, 17, 18 as well. So I've had kids who have told me that they were able to attempt 17, 18 questions as well. So yeah, the level was slightly above Cat 24, slightly as in, again, the percentage increment in the difficulty level would be 2 to 5%, not more than that. But yeah, I am again trying to compare everything with slot 24, not amongst the slot, because I genuinely believe that you should be attempting all three slots to be able to compare the
Correct.
slots internally. So one thing, sir, if you allow me, I wanted to address was there are a lot of information sources going on online, a lot of websites and everyone posting that slot 2 will be scaled up and slot 3 will be scaled down and slot 1 will be scaled down. I want to request all the students who are watching us live to not believe in any of this. None of the people saying this online have attempted all three slots. We are in no position to compare the verbal of slot 1 with slot 2 or slot 3. Same goes for DILR and quant. Do not believe any such thing. In 5 to 7 days or maximum 10 days, we'll have the response sheets out with us and we'll get our scores then. And then we'll be able to compare the data and figure out which slot will be scaled how. That will also be a rough estimation. It will not be exact, but that will give us a good insight into what the estimation would actually look like. So please don't believe anything and go into this panic mode or anything. Inter-slot comparison is something that you should avoid right now. We are comparing everything to Cat 24 slot 1. So please remember that to all the kids who are watching us live, because I have been absolutely bombarded with messages where kids are feeling that slot 2 ज़्यादा difficult था, slot 3 easy था, slot 1 easy था. And I do not believe in any of this nonsense right now, because nobody knows. None of us who are here on the panel as well have attempted slot 2 or slot 3 individually. So we do not know, guys. All of us have definitely attempted Cat 24 slot 1, either live or in the form of past Cat paper. So we can compare it to that because we know what the difficulty level was there in that particular paper. So that is a humble request to everyone who is attending this live, and everybody who will be trying to watch this again in the later time slots.
Yeah. And there were no questions from PNC, right, this year in slot 1 or 2?
Sir, there was this
Slot
one
1, there
question
was one
from
PNC, the
sandwiches.
sandwich one.
Okay. Okay. But in my slot, there
Low
was no question
probability.
on PNC, I think. So at least I didn't find anything on PNC specifically. But
No
anyway,
question of
In
maybe.
probability
slot
in
1, in
slot 1
fact,
as
we
well,
had
sir.
a wider distribution this time among the topics. So if you talk about arithmetic, you have everything covered. So there was a question on percentage, there was a question on profit and loss, there was a question on SICI, there was a question on partnership, there was a question on ratio, time and work, time, speed, distance. Everything had one question that is being represented on a given topic.
Okay.
Also, one more thing. So we had a lot of questions where topics were mixed, sir. Log had certain quadratic equations
Yes.
involved. We had numbers with surds and indices wala powers, wherein we had to use certain formulas from AP and GP to get the answer. So cross area questions were a lot. They were very much visible.
Okay. So we'll now talk about the individual sectional and then overall percentile estimate as well. So this is the current estimate that we have based on the first take analysis that we had, and then we revised some of the estimates based on the inputs from the mentors and then from the students. So overall, the sense that we have is that slot 1, if you look at the overall score that would be required to get to say a 99 percentile, should be somewhere around 90. For slot 2 it would be the least, because the slot 2 was found to be comparatively difficult than slot 1. But again, as Rutik also mentioned, right, that nobody has actually sat for individual slots. So only if somebody sits through 3 slots, they'll be able to have an objective comparison. Right now, everything is based on, okay, how let's say XYZ number of people have found it to be, and then we've sort of taken an aggregate and average of that estimate. So slot 2 was found to be more difficult compared to slot 1, so that's the least in terms of the score required. And slot 3 sat sort of between slot 1 and slot 2. So not as difficult as the reports of slot 2 in terms of quant and DLR difficulty. VRC, I think, had like the consistent, more or less consistent
Pretty much,
difficulty
yeah.
across the 3 slots. But students found slightly difference in terms of difficulty when you look at slot 1 versus 2 versus 3. Okay. Somewhere around a score of 50 should take you closer to 90 percentile. and something in the range of 35 to 40 would be around 80 percentile. So if you're looking at something like an 85 plus percentile thing, you're looking at a score between 41 to 45. That is across the slots. If you're sitting in that particular range, considering your attempts and accuracy, you can expect to get around 85 percentile. Okay. Between 75 to 80 marks would be around 98 percentile. So these are the initial estimates that we have. If you look at the individual sections, as I said, in VRC, there wasn't a lot of fluctuation. So you would see the numbers are very, very close to each other with something like a plus or minus 2 here and there. So you would see, for example, slot 3, because students were mentally prepared to read dense RCs, we have increased the estimate a little bit compared to slot 1. But that won't happen at the lower level. So typically in the lower levels, you would see, for example, 95, 90, 85, 80 percentile, the figures remain more or less the same. Slot 2, VRC at the bottom level, the 95 to 80 level, right? The last four columns you would see, they're slightly higher than what it is for slot 1 and slot 3. But for slot 2, though the VRC was found to be slightly more, you can say, easier, because quant and DLR were found to be more difficult, then overall you would see that slot 2 has become difficult. Now, speaking of DILR, again, as we discussed, across the slots, no major fluctuations as such, except slot 2, where it was found that it was comparatively difficult compared to, let's say, even the last year's paper. Not as difficult as 23 for sure. But yes, that is why we have reduced the estimate. So if you look at slot 2, it is lower compared to slot 1 and slot 3 across. Okay, so only at the bottom, let's say, for example, 80 percentile and below, you would see getting one set correct. If you have got, let's say, a set with 4 questions or a set with 5 questions correct, then you would be able to get very close to 85 percentile. Okay, so those of you who solved one set properly, then you will be able to get to around I would say about an 85 percentile mark. If you have done two sets correctly, right, then you are looking at somewhere in the range of 95 percentile. So if you have solved two sets today, feel good about your attempt, right? And if you have got all of them correct also, because I can see some of the students were talking about discussing questions, etc. in the chat. But see, the point is, response sheet will be out anyway, right? So you don't have to worry about it right now, and what's done is done. So no point spending too much time on it. And as again Rutvik said, right, everybody will keep talking about, okay, what will be score versus percentile, but these are all estimates, and you have to treat all estimates with that thing that, okay, things can always change from here on. See, because normalization is going to play a role, and that has played a role every single year. So it's very
Normalization,
difficult
and
to
plus, sir, we have access to a few students that we are able to connect with and talk to, and the team that we have. So these must be somewhere close to 200, 250 people that we talk to who appear for CAT. And when you look at the entire picture of India, it is somewhere close to 2 lakh 10,000, 2 lakh 20,000 people will be attempting CAT this year. Again, these are again very rough estimates about the number of attempts as well. But then again, too early to tell anything between slots as of now.
Yeah. And coming to quant now, so again, slot 1, the initial estimate seems to be on the higher side. So because a lot of people said that the questions were doable, right? So we have kept it closer to CAT 24 in that sense. But again, you would see that for 98 percentile, somebody should have solved about 10 questions correct. So if you get net 11 questions correct, you are at about 99 percentile. But for slot 2 and slot 3, it is lower. For slot 2, it is the least, which is 28. So if you got, let's say, 12 attempts, maybe 10 correct, 2 wrong, you are still sitting at that 99 percentile thing. For slot 3, 30, I think 9 to 10 questions if you're done, you will be very, very close to 99 percentile, if not more. Uh, Across the three slots, we would see that if you are getting, let's say, let's say 4 questions correct, right? 4 to 5 questions, you are between 80 to 85 percentile. So 5 questions correct, mostly you will clear the sectional cutoff this year. Okay, so those of you have attempted more than 5 questions, right, and you are expecting them to be right, then your score will be around 85 percentile. Okay. All right, so let's go back to the overall thing, and we are going to just keep that as the last slide for the discussion today. We're about to close pretty soon. So overall, this is where we think the things will lie. So slightly more difficult than CAT 24 across the three slots is what we can conclude, but not as difficult as CAT 23. So your cutoffs are going to be lying somewhere between CAT 23 cutoffs and CAT 24 cutoffs when it comes to score versus percentile. Okay. Any last minute thing, Shivam sir, Vijita ma'am, and Rutvik sir, if you want to share anything from your experience today, something that students can look forward to now from here, and any concluding remarks in that sense.
I would say
So
the
when
thing that you can look forward to is the upcoming exams. People must have signed up for NMAT, SNAP, ZAT, even MyCat. So today is done, and just start moving on, start preparing the for the other exams, start taking the mocks, and have your strategy for the admits.
So I was there when I also appeared for CAT 23, and I was there at the center trying to look after kids. I have usually seen that after such a paper, people and the students feel very low. They come out sulking, and they feel like the world is going to end and their paper has not been up to the mark. But that is absolutely not the case once you get the final results out. Don't speculate anything. Don't try and find out your scores right now through various sources. Do not do that. You will have your response keys by Friday or maximum Monday. You will have your actual scores by that time, and then you'll be able to figure out what rough percentile you'll be scoring. Don't waste any time in speculating. Take a day, a couple of days off, and then, as Shivam sir also said, please start focusing upon Snap, NMAT, and ZAT. Snap is on 6th. You hardly have 5 days to prepare for it. Please
Absolutely, yes.
take a day off if you feel like it, but not more than a day. And don't speculate anything on what CAT is going to look like or what the scores are going to look like. Please do not do that. You will get the actual results. You will get better estimates from us in the near future. Wait for that once you have your response keys.
Vijita ma'am, would you
It's
like
the
to add in?
same thing, yes. I mean, this is one day, it's done and dusted. Look ahead, there are so many more exams. Just prepare, put your heart and soul into the upcoming exams and prepare well for it. Yes, you need a break, of course, but I would suggest that maybe just a day's break will suffice, especially because 6th is round the corner and you really need to get into a speed test mode. Snap is a speed test. Also, considering the way in which ZAT is panning out or has panned out over the last couple of years, becoming more structured, more student friendly, I think that's an exam that you should give your everything to. Not that NMAT and SNAP are not important, but from a premier college perspective, yes, ZAT can be considered. If you think your CAT didn't go well, please consider ZAT. Even the decision making sectional there is not a very difficult one. Someone who's fairly well trained with critical reasoning and a good reader can surely manage that. So yes, please look ahead and continue with your preparation.
Okay.
That's all.
So, I saw a lot of students asking in the beginning that are we going to discuss any questions and all. By the way, you're not supposed to discuss questions. So you might have seen on YouTube and social media, a lot of people are discussing the questions. You are not supposed to be doing that. CAT has an official, you have that non-disclosure
NDA.
agreement. So you're not supposed to share these questions because they are going to release them in a formal manner. So that is why we consciously always have never discussed the questions on that day because it doesn't make sense. It's not fair for students as well. So with that, we're going to end the session. We are going to have one more live session today at 11 o'clock, which is going to be more of just like a session to discuss what happened, especially for students who have not done well and what can they do from now on. Of course, it's going to talk more about ADMATs and what you should be looking forward to. So maybe I'll see you at that point of time. But for this particular session, we're going to end it now. Thank you everyone for joining us throughout the day for
Thank you so
slot
much, sir.
1,
All the
2,
best
and
to everyone
3.
watching.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank you, all
everyone.
the
Bye.
best.
Bye.